Okay, guys, well, we're back again for another episode of Rotten Reviews, and I can't actually say this is a normal episode of Rotten Reviews for me because I'm going to be talking about a film that is not actually listed as rotten on Rotten Tomatoes, and that would be Birds of Prey, and in parentheses, and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn. Don't ask me why they chose a title so convoluted and long-winded as that. They could have just called it Harley Quinn or Birds of Prey, but whatever. Let's just call it Birds of Prey. It has a 78% rating on the critic score, the tomato meter, certified fresh, no less, meaning that it never dropped out of the fresh category during any of its critic reviews, or the consensus didn't. And then we have 78% on the audience score with over 15,000 verified ratings. Wow, I have to say that the reason I'm doing a rotten review on this is simply because I do not agree. In fact, I don't think these numbers are just a little bit off. I think that these numbers are suspiciously, incredibly way off and out of the norm, even for Rotten Tomatoes. Um, Personally, I just found this film incredibly boring. Boring to the point that just a little bit shy of halfway through the running time, I really, really, really wanted to fast forward or skip through it to see if anything actually happened interesting at the end. And here's a spoiler, nothing did happen at the end to make it worth sitting through. I was bored, not right away. I found it a little bit quirky and different and colorful and a little unconventional for a DC Comics movie. A little bit unconventional even compared to Suicide Squad, where this character first showed up in the DCEU or DC Cinematic Universe. I just have to say I was bored. I was really bored, and about halfway through, I just wanted to give up. But no, I stuck it out because it was at that point I said, yeah, this is going to turn into some kind of video of me bagging on this movie because I wasn't planning on doing so. I had heard people say they didn't like this. I heard that it flopped at the box office. But of course, this was, right at the time that COVID-19 showed up and it started becoming the popular scary thing out there, and theaters started to shut down shortly after this. So it kind of got lost in the mix for me. Now, the reason I'm here talking about it is because it just showed up on HBO. So if you're subscribed to HBO, you can get this on HBO, HBO on demand. You're already paying for it, so why not? And so I queued this up. I had no idea I was going to be talking about it because I thought I would find it like Suicide Squad, and a lot of people say Suicide Squad is just really abhorrent to them. They're just disgusted by it. The fact that it let them down as fans of the DC Cinematic Universe, as fans of the characters that are in the movie Suicide Squad. And so I know there's just a lot of people out there that hate Suicide Squad, and a smaller amount that actually say they like it. Well, surprisingly, I'm in the minority that I actually didn't hate Suicide Squad. I didn't think it was the greatest thing of all time, but I actually watched the whole thing and I wasn't bored, and it was just weird enough and different enough for me to go all the way through it. Now, I didn't do a rotten review on Suicide Squad. I don't believe I did, at least not a straightforward one, because I didn't consider it to be that bad. However, most people did, and I believe on Rotten Tomatoes it does have bad scores. I'm not going to go back and look it up. In any case, that's why I sat through this thinking originally that this wouldn't be a candidate for me to do a rotten review on. But like I said, 30 minutes in, 40 minutes in, I said, wow, this is really not going anywhere. The characters are borderline unlikable. They're quirky and weird, but they don't seem to do anything together, and they don't seem to be set up in any way. Like you would think you would get an origin story for this Harley Quinn character that we first saw in Suicide Squad in the movies. Yes, she's a comic book character from years and years ago, but the movies aren't made for just comic book viewers. They're made for the general audiences to get into this stuff. And as a person that was never into these comics, I never got any real backstory on how Harley Quinn came to exist. You get some very cursory, very uh, basically just narrated by the actress who plays Harley Quinn. It's just narration telling you that basically she fell into a vat of chemicals at a chemical factory and turned into her psychopathic character and became lovers with the Joker. And it very much reminded me of just a ripoff of what was done in Tim Burton's 1989 Batman, where you still didn't get an origin in the Joker in that movie. He just also fell into a vat of chemicals, and you were expected to believe that that turned him into this psychopathic villain. Now, in the case of the Joker, I know that the Joker was never explained as in an origin story properly in the actual comic books that he sourced from. And so you can kind of hand wave that away and say, well, he's just a mysterious figure and he was never quite explained in the comics. So Tim Burton didn't have to quite explain him concretely in his 1989 film. But it's like the director of this, Kathy Yan, she just kind of copied Tim Burton's thing and hand waved it away, where Harley Quinn was a doctor, or in some facility she was working at the Arkham Insane Asylum, and she met the Joker in there as a patient, and somehow she was at this chemical factory and she fell into the vat, and when she came out of the vat she was as crazy as him. And you just kind of have to shake your head and wonder, well, this doesn't make any sense. But then again, the 1989 Tim Burton origin attempt at the Joker didn't make a damn bit of sense either. You could overlook it because Jack Nicholson played the character so crazy that it was a hit. I was never really fond of that movie because I couldn't take it that seriously. In 1989, I was 19 years old, and it was the first Batman I had seen in the movie theater, and I just found it interesting enough, but not some groundbreaking work of art that I wanted to watch multiple times, because I just couldn't get into the believability. Tim Burton for me is somebody that's producing stuff that's not believable at all. It's supposed to be like Beetlejuice. It's like in its own alternate weird dimension. And so I could kind of forgive that, the Joker didn't make much sense in that movie. Well, Kathy Yan just did a straight up really sloppy impersonation of that, and just said, well, Harley Quinn fell into the chemicals like the Joker, and so there she is. And that's what she tells you in her narration. And Margot Robbie does a good job playing the same character she played in Suicide Squad. In fact, all of the actors do pretty good jobs playing the characters they're supposed to be playing. They convince you that they are in fact these weird characters that, even though they're not quite likable, they're authentically these characters. They don't remind me of the actors or actresses doing things in other movies. They seem like they're doing a good job of portraying these characters. However, the characters are very unset up and have no real concrete origin to them, and they don't feel real. And a lot of things in this movie don't feel real. Even the design of the sets and the time period it takes place in. At points in this movie, I was confused as to exactly what time period we were in, because you see everybody driving old cars, and you see old telephones and payphones and landline phones and clothing styles that, although they're a little strange, they could be in the 80s or 90s. And a lot of things are like that, but yet you still have like really old BlackBerry cell phones being used. So you could say, well, maybe it's in the 90s. And then, nope, you get glimpses of modern Android phones some people are using. Yet people are still going to payphones and using landline phones for important business in their apartments, or even the big bad villains using an old stylistic landline phone to talk to his henchmen on. I mean, why doesn't he have a cell phone? Why no text messages? Why? A lot of things in this movie make no sense. Harley Quinn's driving around in an early 90s or late 80s convertible Jaguar. Fine, but all of the other characters are driving around in old cars too, and you'll just randomly see old cars from the 80s and 90s parked everywhere. But in the background of all the shots, there's modern late 2000s new vehicles parked back there too, and you can clearly see them all over the place and passing by in traffic. So it's really confusing where we're supposed to be. It's almost like we're in an alternate dimension where all the 80s, 90s, and 2000s are all mixed together, and it's so distracting that I can't get into it and believe any of it's real at all. yes, it's a comic book story, but there has to be some kind of logic to it, some kind of believability, even within its own weird world, or it's too distracting. And a lot of it was like that. And the villain, played by Ewan McGregor, like I said, Ewan McGregor does a good job, but like there's no origin for this villain. He's just a psychopathic thug that needs to put on a black mask. There's nothing wrong with his face, but he puts on this black mask at the end of it in the final act because his character is called the Black Mask, and basically he's just like a mafia type scumbag and a psychopath that everybody's afraid of. And I don't understand why he's an effective comic book villain. It's very weird and boring, and even the way they dispatch him at the end of the film is completely boring, and you can just shrug it off. And in fact, the storyline kind of just shrugs off that the big bad villain's been killed, and just like they dust themselves off and move on like it wasn't any big deal. And the whole thing's just a big letdown, and it's boring, very stylistic. The director was really trying to do a like a carnival rundown, carnival type stylistic thing on this that kind of reminded me of the video games, the popular, very good and very popular video games, Batman themed, Arkham Asylum and Arkham Knight. Very good games. I've played them. I'm not a huge video game fan, but I've played those, and everybody else I know has, and they're great games. And the style that you see in those games, it's like this director studied the style in parts of those games and tried to bring that into this movie, and it felt like a very cheap way to stylize the movie, and it didn't add up to a lot of anything. Like, you had a lot of fight scenes between characters, unrealistic fight scenes that were hard to believe, where normal sized women without superpowers in the physical sense were fighting big bad thugs, and the thugs would punch, for example, a 200 something pound thug would punch a girl in the stomach and it wouldn't affect her at all, and she would just keep fighting. Yet the same girl, or even a smaller girl, would kick or punch one of the thugs and he would be knocked backwards like she had the strength of four men. It's just not realistic. And in some of the fight scenes it looked like it was more just choreographed acrobatics, and they weren't really hitting each other, and you could kind of tell. And it was totally unconvincing and just boring to watch, even though it was fantastically stylistic and colorful, like it was trying to imitate one of the Arkham video games. But anyway, what I want to do with this is kind of find out, if I can, why this has a 78% audience score. Because when I saw this audience score, I said, whoa, what is going on with this? And I went back in time and I found previous, I have snapshots of previous tomato meter scores on this film from when it was first released. And it started out with like a 90, a mid to high 90 score on both the tomato meter and the audience score. And as the weeks went on, the scores dropped, and we are now down to 78% on both of those meters. And I think it's going to stay there no matter how many more reviews on the audience score it gets. But the fact that it didn't drop out of fresh and it's still certified fresh, I mean, what is it, political? That's what other people say. So I have to lean into it and say, yeah, I have the feeling that this is political because a lot was made out of this movie about it being some kind of all-female thing. Well, I'm sorry, but I don't look at this as like trying to get feminist politics out of a movie. I look at this as trying to be entertained by a movie, and I found it boring, right? So I want to find out how many other people thought along the lines that I do, that this is a boring film, and are they also surprised that this has a 78% on the audience score? We're going to get into the audience scores and find out. And I have an actual list. It's one solid page of problems I wrote down as the running time increased. And I may or may not get into all of these depending on what the audience reviews say, because it has problems despite the fact that it's boring. I think the fatal flaw is just that it's boring, but it has a lot of other problems with the logic, plot holes and etc. But again, if it wasn't boring, I could forgive a lot of that. But when I want to sit there and fast forward through something or just shut it off, that's pretty damn bad. That's completely separate from having, little plot holes here and there. But let's get into the audience reviews. And I'm going to only entertain 3-star and below reviews because that's where we get our information from here. And half a star, really bad movie. Okay, I'll agree. what would I give it on the stars? I would say it might hit 2 stars, but I'm going to go more with 1.5 stars because I was so bored. So I'm going to go with 1.5 stars on this as my personal rating. Uh, so let's see what we find. 2.5 stars from one day ago. Frenzied, uneven, but starts to click once Harley pairs up with the pickpocket. Well, I disagree with that. 2.5 stars isn't really saying this is a good movie. Frenzied and uneven are certainly not good things to have in a review. But saying that this clicks once Harley pairs up with the pickpocket, well, the pickpocket I thought was the worst character of all of them. I mean, she's a central character to the plot of this film. And the plot of this film, really what drives the plot at all isn't the big bad villain or what he's doing. It's basically that there is this diamond, this almost priceless diamond, this big priceless diamond, unrealistically big, but let's go with it. It's got some laser encoded encrypted bank code in this diamond that somehow gives you access to some gigantic bank account that if the bad guy gets his hands on it, it would fuel his criminal enterprises for a long time. If the good guys, whoever they may be, get this bank account, it'll fuel their good guy enterprise for a long time. Okay, but the whole premise that there's like some number encoded into a diamond that if you just have this number, you get access to the secret money, and somehow this secret money, the government can't find it, and the banking system otherwise couldn't locate it, and it just needs this encrypted code that's in this diamond. That's not how the banking system works. It's really stupid. It's like something a junior high school student might think about how the banking system works. This is worse than just believing you can get a Swiss bank account and that protects you from all of the US and the IRS and governments of the world. That's not how it works. That's movie logic, the worst movie logic. This is even worse because it's just saying if you have an encrypted number, a really long encrypted series of digits, somehow this gives you access to an account that even the government can't find, and that's not the way things work. They should have gone with cryptocurrency of some type. That would have been a lot more believable, maybe even feasible in the real world. But the way they do it in this film, it's like they put the logic of a teenage girl into this. This is like a fault of the director. I mean, come on. It doesn't take much research to think, well, we have to have some believability to this, but the central theme is this bank account plot with this diamond. Now, the pickpocket girl has swallowed the diamond, presumably because after she pickpocketed it, it was the only way to hide it after her, she knew she was about to be arrested. She had been caught. So she swallowed it, and the plot involves Harley Quinn and the good girls wanting to, feed her laxative to make her shit out this diamond, whereas the bad guys just want to cut it out of her. It's very simplistic, really stupid, and kind of boring. Not much thought was put into this. It's too boring to even be considered a cliched driver for the plot. This is just really a really lame excuse to move the plot forward. And the pickpocket girl herself is probably the worst characterized, with absolutely no backstory, very little dialogue. Her acting, I can't even say it's bad, but I can't say it's good, because out of all the characters, she does the most bland job and is least characterized, and she's annoying, and she's nothing to look at, and she's just the worst of all the characters in my opinion, yet she's the central character to the plot that's driving this thing forward. Really bad. So the fact, the reviewer saying that this actually starts to click once Harley pairs up with her, no. In fact, when Harley paired up with her, it actually caused the film to be more boring for me. I was like, is this it? Is this the whole thing? I mean, this is going nowhere. So let's move on. 1.5 stars, one day ago. I can't recommend watching this movie. Story wasn't interesting or compelling. Characters weren't interesting or developed. Action was ridiculous, not believable, and not fun to watch. Mainly involved hitting people with a bat or like object. Villain was not believable or interesting. Just a weird sociopath that seemed to be trying to be like the Joker. Why does he even wear a mask? Never explained or addressed. Not very funny. Sadly, another forgettable DC movie. Yeah, I agree with almost everything this reviewer has said. I'll even agree with the 1.5 stars, like I said. Um, yeah, nothing about this is compelling. There's a lot of visual flair, but it doesn't make sense. Harley Quinn goes into a police precinct and doesn't kill outright, but disables and maims possibly all of the cops, dispatches with them by using a shotgun or a mortar gun of some type that is like filled with glitter shotgun shells or little mortar rounds like M80, like an M80 grenade launcher you would see on the bottom of an M4, but it's got like glitter rounds, glitter in it and stuff. I mean, it makes no damn sense. It looks painful, but it's designed to look colorful and to spray glitter everywhere. And of course, none of the cops are able to disarm her. Keep in mind, this is like, it must be in the modern world, and the cops are using like old style uniforms with old school revolvers, and they're unable to get a single shot off on her, and they're just incapacitated. I mean, picture Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator going into the police precinct, in the early 80s and just dispatching with the whole police precinct because he's a unstoppable cyborg. But it's worse than that. It's like Harley Quinn just cracking wisecracks and doing some acrobatic flips and kicking a lot of cops in the chest and shooting them with glitter filled mortar rounds or shotgun shells. And it's really, it would be okay if it was a comedy, but it's not funny. Like this reviewer mentioned, it's not funny. It expects you to take it serious, and it's like the director thought that just Harley Quinn just cracking wisecracks would be enough to carry all of this and make it fun, and it's not. It's just boring and weird. And the villain, they mention the villain again. He's a sociopath and a thug, but why is he the Black Mask? Why does he put on this black mask? It makes no sense. He just does it to have a style, I guess. It's not entertaining. It's just boring. Nothing's ever explained or addressed. Nothing has an origin. I mean, it's very cursory. Even Harley Quinn just does the very cursory words in her narration on what she used to do before she was Harley Quinn. And she talks a lot about the Joker in the beginning, about how she broke up with him. And of course, it's almost like the film's just name dropping the Joker to like try to associate itself with some material that's far more interesting. But it doesn't work, and it just comes across as a cheap way to plug this into the DC universe, and it's just cheap and lazy and boring. Um, the story not being interesting or compelling, yeah, exactly. It's not even up to junior high school level standards. It's just like, again, like I'll say it again, the way the main villain was killed at the end, he was just killed by a hand grenade that the pickpocket girl pulled the pin on it, and it was in his pocket. She had put it there, and it just blew him in half. And that was it. Game over. Let's move on. What was the point of all that? There was no point to it. It was just a whole lot of nothing. Half a star, not good at all. This movie enters my top 10 worst movies ever. Yeah, it could be. There's a lot more out there that's a lot worse. I mean, at least this was colorful. At least the director, you could tell the director put a lot of effort into the style, into the visuals, but again, it just didn't look real. It didn't look believable. It didn't feel like there was anything at stake. You just didn't care. You were watching a whole lot of colorful stuff and wondering what's the point of it. But she did put effort into the visual look of it. I'll give her that. 1 star, took too long to get the backstory filled out to understand characters. I disagree. You never did understand the characters at all. Just like the other movies in the DC universe, this was rushed and not thought out. Sad because all these characters are badass in the comics. Yeah, I've heard that said by other people that know these characters from the comics, that they are complete characters that have origin stories, and yet this movie just threw them out there in a cardboard fashion and said, here they are, and a few words will give you on where they came from or what they were doing a few minutes before the film opened, and then that's it. You're supposed to believe all of it and understand why they act the way they do, and no, it just comes across as a whole lot of visual nothingness. 1 star, this was just terrible and over the top. Dialogue was lacking, acting wasn't great, and action scenes were absurd. Yeah, it was absurd watching very thin women, very light, thin women just kick big thugs around like they were nothing. And when the thugs actually got solid shots on them, they just brushed it off without even a grunt. Um, it wasn't even, it was like you're watching a bunch of acrobats go through a bunch of fake stuff. And it's sad because the director, again, put a lot of effort into the visual style, but like, apparently she consulted no one on making the fight scenes somewhat even a little bit believable. It just comes across as like more unbelievable than a cartoon. Half a star, the worst movie ever. Um, there are a few 4-star reviews, 3.5, 4-star reviews. I'm sorry, I'm just not going to take you guys seriously when you put those reviews in there. Half a star, this movie was terrible. Yeah, it was, because boring, I think, is more terrible than anything else. Even a movie that, like offends you has something going for it because it got an emotional reaction. This one is just like I'm watching it going, I just feel nothing for this. It's just, it looks like a lot of visual stuff going on and none of it's believable. 1 star, so disjointed and not fun at all. Suicide Squad was a far better film, and that's hard to say. Yeah, I agree with that too. Suicide Squad was better. I wasn't bored. I didn't think it was the greatest thing. I didn't think it was up to the standards of almost any of the Marvel movies. And it was a DC Universe movie that was disappointing. But it was a lot better than this, and it was at least able to carry me through it without any boredom at all. Uh, what do I have on my list of actual flaws aside from the boring factor? First thing I wrote down was, what do chemicals have to do with creating Harley Quinn other than calling back to the 1989 Batman film? I covered that already. I don't think it has anything to do with it except the director wanted a cheap way to hand wave away Harley Quinn's origin story, and the film really suffers for it because she's the central character. She's in the title of the film. So you could have all the other characters very lightly characterized, but you shouldn't do that with the person in the title. This is about Harley Quinn, and yet it's about somebody you still know nothing about at all, and therefore you don't care about anything that happens to her. And you watch her go through the whole film trying to do like funny wisecracks and stuff, and I think only like in 2 instances did I feel like laughing. I don't think I actually laughed, but it came close for me. But all of the hundreds of times that it's supposed to be funny and snarky, and I felt nothing, and I was just like, wow, it's a whole lot of it doesn't work for me. Uh, it's sad because this could have worked as a comedy, and yet the comedy fails at almost every level in this. And you can tell a lot of the interactions between the characters, they're supposed to be funny, but they just come across as snarky, unlikable characters like dealing with each other, and it's not funny at all. And it's like they didn't understand humor or how to do humor. Whoever wrote this didn't understand humor. The second thing on my list, the diamond, yeah, the plot with the code that's in the diamond gives you access to the secret bank account. Again, I already mentioned this. That's not how the banking system works. It makes no sense. Um, why do we need to rewind? Yeah, this isn't a straightforward linear story. It should have been. It didn't need to rewind. In fact, Harley Quinn goes through narrating it, and that's another problem. She doesn't narrate it straightforward. She narrates the beginning segment straightforward, and then all of a sudden she'll just stop and say, "Oh wait, hold on. I I did this wrong. I forgot to tell you about this other thing." And then it'll literally rewind through the entire scene, going back 10 minutes, and then you'll be in another spot and she'll be telling you about something else that she says she forgot to tell you about. And she does this 2 or 3 times in the movie, and there's no reason for it. It's not cool and edgy. It doesn't like give it a stylistic edge, but I think the director thought it would, and that's why you see like the actual movie rewinding at fast speed to go back to another scene somewhere else. And I think Kathy Yan thought this would be somehow cutting edge, but it's not, and it's just dumb, and it interrupts the flow of the movie and makes it even harder to get into it. And so it's not linear, and there's no reason why it's not told in a linear fashion, and it's doubly compounding the confusion regarding where this movie is actually set, like what time period it's in, because are we in the past, the future, an alternate dimension? It's very confusing. And so you may hear also, by the way, an Amber Alert going off on my phone. Very annoying. I'm in a location where there's a lot of Amber Alerts flying around, and so you might pick that up on the video, just as an aside. In any case, what's next on my list? Style and glitter over realism. Yeah, like I said, weapons, they're not believable. The guns and weapons that are used, they're just there to be stylistic and produce glitter-like weird carnival effects, and it doesn't work. It's not funny. It just takes you out of the believability of the film. And I forgot to mention what I was about to mention with the, when I talked about Harley Quinn narrating the film. This got a big problem, and you don't see this a lot in modern films, except in really bad B movies, where there's a main character that's narrating the entire story to you in a lot of films, but they're usually very careful to not show you things, to not have scenes in the movie that the character couldn't possibly know about to narrate to you. So this film has Harley Quinn narrating things to you that she couldn't possibly know about in the film. She never had access to that information. She never had access to those scenes. She never heard the dialogue going on or knew the motives of the characters in those locations because she was in a far different location. And yet she's narrating this stuff to you through the entire film, and even taking you back in time to scenes in which she was never there to tell you things that happened. And again, it takes you out of the believability of this whole thing, and it makes no damn sense. And it's not cutting edge or avant-garde. And if Kathy Yan thought this, would showcase how cutting edge she is, she actually showcased how dumb she is. And I'm really going to say she had to be dumb on some level, because this is like simple storytelling 101, even from somebody writing a book or a short story. You can't have a narrator telling you things that they're not there to know, and you go through the entire story and never explain how they knew those things. Sorry, that's a fail. You failed. You failed as a writer, and you failed as a director. You just proved how dumb you are. What's next on my list? When punches solidly land on the women, and they don't always, of course. Keep in mind, a lot of this is acrobatics, and it's obviously choreographed, and they didn't do a very good job of making it look real. A lot of the punches that come from the bad guys onto the women, they never land, which is fine. But yet, when they do land, and they land well, the women don't feel anything. It's like a joke to them, like somebody barely bumped them or something. And I'm sorry, but that's just not believable. None of these characters are Supergirl. They have powers. Actually, one of them, Canary, has the vocal power that's actually like a superpower. Harley Quinn has no superpower. She's physically just like a regular woman. Yet, a lot of stuff in the movie, it's like she is not a regular woman, that she's got cybernetic super strength and all this stuff, and it's just not believable. Like, you can't tell me that she fell into a vat of chemicals and it made her psychopathic and weird and loopy, and it also gave her invulnerability and super reflexes and super acrobatics, and again, it's a complete fail. And how does somebody hit her and these other girls, and they just, if I had been hit this way one time by one of these thugs, I would have been in serious trouble. I wouldn't have just like brushed it off. It's just ridiculous. It really is. Next on my list, let's see. Yeah, I said this before a few times. There's no distinct time setting. You've got things that are all mixed up together from different time periods, and it looks like it's just a stylistic choice again by the director to make this look so stylistically weird, but it just makes it impossible to believe any of it's real. It doesn't make any sense. Before I go through too many, let's look at more audience reviews. Here's a 3-star. Better than the Suicide Squad. No doubt, but it is also a little disappointing. They used these attributes so superficially that the 2 Deadpool films used the fourth wall break. That was good, but it could have put more effort. Well, to interrupt this review, I don't think they don't actually interrupt the fourth wall. Like, they don't break the fourth wall directly, except for Harley Quinn narrating, rewinding the story and narrating to the audience. You could say that's breaking the fourth wall, but not really, because she's just like a narrator, or maybe even an unreliable narrator that's taking you through the film. Fine. But as far as like, do characters in the movie, actually look at the audience or, comment things outside of the screen? No, they don't. I don't think there's any actual breaking of the fourth wall. That might have been interesting, but they don't do that. Deadpool does, of course. So I disagree there, but let's continue. Um, the whole cast is good, and Margot Robbie stands out as Harley Quinn without being able to extrapolate and exaggerate, making the experience good, but it could have been much better. I disagree. The experience was boring. Yes, it could have been much better. If it had just not been boring, I would have forgave a lot of the stuff I already mentioned. Like I would have forgave the narration. I would have forgave having things from different time periods mixed together in a weird way. This would have all been stuff that would have gone by me no problem if it just hadn't gotten boring. Once it got boring, I was able to really write down a lot of problems with this film. 1.5 stars. Pros: 1, it's quite short, around 100 minutes. Yes, that's true. It does feel short. 2, like the sandwich subplot. Let's mention that they're saying they liked it. This is a 1.5 star review, but they're saying they liked the sandwich subplot. The sandwich subplot is which Harley Quinn shows us that her whole terrible day that set off all of these things that happened to her, presumably. It doesn't really, but in her mind, the start of her terrible day and all this terrible stuff happening was that she couldn't get this disgusting sandwich that she always orders from this corner delicatessen or sandwich shop that she goes to. The whole thing is disgusting, but she likes it disgusting, and she likes the disgusting sandwich shop. I wouldn't be caught dead near that place. But she likes it fine, and she couldn't get her sandwich the way she wanted it, and she's always getting it, and like that's supposedly what made her in a bad mood and set off all this bad stuff. And it's ridiculous, and it's gross, and it's not even funny. It's supposed to be funny, I guess, and edgy, and it fails to characterize Harley Quinn other than that she likes disgusting things. It doesn't do anything else with that. You would think you could use something like that to show us something about a character, but it really doesn't. It's just like a weird, disgusting thing in the movie, and it doesn't work on a lot of levels. It's a wasted opportunity. Number 3, Ewan McGregor is unconvincing. I disagree with that. I think he was convincing as like a possibly semi-ambiguous gay villain that was homicidal and psychopathic and narcissistic. It was convincing. He did a good job of showing me that, but it didn't make sense. It wasn't set up. There wasn't a point to it, and we didn't understand why he was like that or why this made him a compelling villain. So it was a failure, but I disagree it was unconvincing. That part was convincing. He did a good job of playing that weird character. It's just, it didn't work. Number 4, hard to care about any of the characters. Yeah, how could you when you didn't understand even why they were the way they were? You got some very superficial things. For example, the Huntress was just a mafia daughter that watched her family get killed, and that was it. It was very cardboard, and you didn't understand anything about why this made her run around with a crossbow killing people, or why she was disturbed that she was called the crossbow killer when she was basically a serial killer with a crossbow. Is it supposed to be funny? Is it supposed to be quirky? I don't know what it's supposed to be, but it felt unconvincing and cardboard and stupid. Number 5, the team up at the end doesn't seem to have much build-up. Yeah, the team up at the end doesn't have much build-up, and it doesn't make sense, and the characters don't fit together, and they don't like each other, and there's no humor in it, and it just doesn't work. They're just there because they're supposed to be there, and that's what the movie says is supposed to happen, and it's completely unconvincing and boring. On the whole, pretty disappointing. That's the one thing I 100% agree with in this review. It's pretty disappointing, very disappointing. 3 stars from 4 days ago. This film isn't as good as it thinks it is, but that doesn't take away from the extravagance that is Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. Yeah, I'll agree. There's nothing wrong with Margot Robbie's performance as Harley Quinn. It's just it doesn't mean anything. It's not set up. It's all superficial. Her humor doesn't work because the writing isn't good. But it could have worked with her doing this stuff in a different type of movie with a different director and better writers. It's not Margot Robbie. There's nothing wrong with what she did. It's very convincing as a weird, quirky Harley Quinn character. It just doesn't work with all the other bad cardboard stuff going on. And I agree completely. This film isn't as good as it thinks it is. It comes across as the director wants you to think she's a lot smarter and more talented than she is, and the film is basically, it's like the film is going, hey, look at me, I'm the greatest, newest, coolest, hippest thing there is, and it's a complete boring mess. I exactly agree with that. Half a star, boring, 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 bad snuff film, don't bother. These peeps rating it up probably rated the horrible Joker movie up too. Terror bad. Um, if they're talking about the Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, I disagree. I thought that was fantastic. It was the complete opposite of this film. It was 100% wanted you to take it serious. It was 100% serious. It was 100% realistic. The scores out there, the reviews reflect that. This is 100% the opposite of Joaquin Phoenix's Joker in every way. And that wasn't boring, despite the fact that I went into that Joker movie thinking I would find it boring. I did not at all. Bad snuff film, I'll agree with, because it's got a lot of gross type stuff in it, gross type violence, and it's got some gross toilet humor and whatnot. And I don't know if that makes it a snuff film, but it's along that direction, I guess, so I see what they're saying. It's kind of gross. It doesn't have to be that gross. 3 stars. This is a cartoon come to life. If you're a kid at heart, you'll enjoy the humor. It's only a cartoon come to life in the regard that it's not believable. If I watch a cartoon and I see cartoon characters hitting each other with wooden mallets and baseball bats, yeah, it's about as realistic as this. That's about the only similarity. I wouldn't call it good, though. When I see a movie on the big screen in a theater, I expect it to be believable in some way. I mean, it can be set in an alternate world. It can be set in somebody's imagination. It can be set on the planet Zyklon C64 in some other galaxy, fine, but it better have some believability to it, or it's just boring, and this is not believable in any way. It's just you're watching a whole lot of stuff and you don't believe 1 second of it. 3 stars. This isn't a film that you can take very seriously, and it certainly plays it pretty loosely with its interpretation of a number of well-known comic book characters who more often than not seem like a shadow of their more famous iterations. The fight scenes themselves are standard, not particularly good or bad. I disagree on that. I think they're particularly bad. They look like fake all the way. But visually, it's got some great stuff going on with its wild production design full of popping colors and a storytelling method befitting of the titular Harley Quinn, who also serves as a narrator. They're making it sound a lot better than it is. 3 stars, hell no. I think, when they say the fight scenes are standard, I don't know what their standard is, but if it's a cartoon show, if it's Saturday morning cartoon that you're getting your fight scene standards from, then okay, it's up to standard. But in a live action film, this is worse than, well, it's about on par, I would say, with the Emperor's Throne Room fight scene in Star. I'm going to keep bringing up this film because it's such a good example of a lot of bad things. Star Wars: The Last Jedi, when the characters of Kylo Ren and Rey are fighting in the Emperor's Throne Room, or Snoke's throne room, if you will, and it's just a whole lot of choreographed stuff going on, very colorful and choreographed and pointless and not particularly exciting, and it's got actual serious flaws in it as a fight scene. It's not quite as bad as that, but it's like that. I mean, on one viewing, you could probably not see that it's that fake. If you watch the fight scene twice, you get a second viewing of this film, you're going to see things that your eye didn't catch the first time, that there's obvious flaws in this where you can tell the punches were fake and etc. And characters, for example, bad guys waiting their turn to attack the girls. In the real world, no, this isn't what happens. They just attack. In this movie, they just kind of hold back and choose when to take turns attacking so that, somebody that's surrounded can fight off from both directions, the bad guys. And it's just really bad and boring. And a B movie, this would be something you would see in a B movie, but this isn't a B movie. This is a big budget Hollywood production with big stars, and it's got like B movie writing and B movie action scenes, and since there's no comedy, there's just no real excuse for this. It's just boring. Let's go on to another page. Wow, let's see. 1.5 stars at the beginning, 5 days ago. Wow, just saw this movie. How is it possible to screw up the great character from Suicide Squad? Margot Robbie gave a fantastic performance in a horrible movie. Yeah, pretty much. Then this movie. Totally screwed up the character despite Robbie trying so hard to carry yet another bad movie. Both these movies are so bad it almost had to be deliberate. Margot Robbie and Harley Quinn both deserve better. Uh, I disagree that they deliberately tried to make a bad movie. I think that, again, it goes into the political angle. I think that they were so focused, even Margot Robbie, so focused on making some kind of feminist message about girl power that they just forgot about everything else you have to have in an action movie, in an entertaining movie, in a movie that people laugh at even. You have to have a lot of other things working. You can't just have girl power for the sake of girl power. And it's like they just forgot about that. And I don't think they set out to make a terrible movie. I think they just, like, all the other things you need to do to make an effective movie just flew out the window because they were so obsessed with girl power and the visual style of their girl power interpretation. Because this film, like a lot of other things that are focused on just girl power, they just take women and give them the characteristics that traditionally male action hero characters would have and call it girl power. But it doesn't quite work like that. And they forgot about everything else. The writing, they forgot about having actual seriously choreographed fights. They forgot about believability. They forgot about setting. Because they were just too focused on girl power. But I don't think they deliberately wanted to just lose money and make a bad movie. That's insanity, and I don't believe that. 3 stars, let's face it. Anyone who saw this movie did it for one single reason, to see Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, especially after seeing Robbie do an even better Harley Quinn-esque character in I, Tonya. Not familiar with that movie. And she is the best part of the film. The problem is that for some bizarre reason, this movie wants her to share the spotlight with a group of characters called Birds of Prey. And every time that Harley does anything, Margot is amazing. Sadly, the movie keeps jumping to these Birds of Prey. Yeah, these different female characters didn't seem to fit in with each other. They're like cardboard characters that don't like each other. They're not likable by themselves. And they're just kind of together for no particular reason to be together. Doesn't make a lot of sense. At the end of the movie, when you see Margot Robbie and them sitting around in a diner, you're kind of wondering, why are they sitting around in a diner? They don't belong together. They're not motivated to be together. It doesn't make any sense. Even the main plot of the story, where one of the characters, the young girl, she has the diamond in her intestines. It doesn't make sense for all these characters to do all this stuff without knowing. Through most of the plot, they don't know the diamond's inner stomach. So why are they teaming up together? A lot of it doesn't make logical sense. There's not enough motivation for them to be risking themselves doing all this stuff together. No, you're just looking at it wondering at the end of this, why are they a thing? Like, it's like watching people that got married but they never fell in love with each other, and they don't have anything in common, and they don't like each other, but you're supposed to believe that they're a happy married couple. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work like that. Half a star. Cartoon horror show, slapdash movie making, small example, FBI at the door, poof goes apartment, store owner packs bags and tells Harley he sold her out, nobody else around, disjointed scenes, Margot Robbie's good acting can't save this fiasco. Now there's a sequel? Lordy. Well, I hope there's not going to be a sequel. That would be really bad. But they just touched upon something that I have further down in my notes, but I'm going to jump right to that. There's a scene. Let's see, where did I write it down? Yeah, 2 different things happen simultaneously. Okay, it's shown in this movie that Harley Quinn's pissed a lot of people off while she was the girlfriend of the Joker. She used that to her advantage to do a whole lot of bad things to a lot of bad people and got away with it because they were afraid of coming after her because she was under the Joker's protection. Now, the movie opens with her finding out the Joker broke up with her. She no longer has his protection. And as these other bad guys around what I would presume is Gotham Looks like bad 1970s New York, but it's Gotham. Um, as they come to realize that she no longer has the protection of the Joker, they start coming after her. Now, there's a scene in which she's in her apartment, or she's in a apartment at least, and with her CGI gigantic full-grown hyena that she keeps as a pet. That's a whole other thing that doesn't quite look real. But anyway, her and her pet hyena are in her apartment, and simultaneously two things happen. One, the FBI shows up and starts banging on her door. It's either the FBI or the Gotham police. I thought it was the police. The reviewer is saying it's the FBI. But either way, it doesn't make sense. They're knocking and banging on her door saying they're going to come in because they know she's there and they want to arrest her, which makes no damn sense. That's not what the police and FBI do. If you're wanted, particularly for violent crime, you attacked a police station, for example, and took down a bunch of cops. They don't show up to your door and pound on it and say you better open up because they're coming in. Only a 10th grader, maybe a 7th grader, maybe a 5th grader would think that this is the way it worked. No, a team of full fucking tactical gear wearing guys come through your door and your windows and every other place, and they've got your building surrounded, if that's the way they choose to do it. Wherever you are when they come for you, they don't knock at your door. They just bust in there and take you down. And you're lucky if they don't just use lethal force on you without any kind of warning. However, because keep in mind, she attacked a damn police precinct, right? Again, this is like a grade schooler thought this out. It's even hard to believe a grade schooler would think in today's world that this is what would happen. But in any case, simultaneously to these FBI agents or police showing up at her door, at the same time, one of the baddies that she pissed off in her past shows up out on the street outside with some kind of giant slingshot with bombs glued together in it, like fireworks glued together to make a bomb, and launches it through her apartment window to blow her up. What happens is the bomb comes through, blows up her apartment. Somehow her hyena is killed, or it's shown that he's killed. She's alive. The FBI disappear and are just gone. She runs down out of the apartment where now the entire apartment building is on fire. The bad guy out on the street that launched the explosive is just mysteriously gone. The police or FBI are mysteriously gone. And now the store owner is there. The store shop owner, this Korean or Chinese guy that lives at the bottom of this apartment building, is packing up his stuff into his car to run and tells her that he had to sell her out because they offered too much money and he needs to get a bigger restaurant or something. It's ridiculous. That's ridiculous too. In any case, all the other problems are just magically gone. The building's on fire. Nobody else is around. And then the Chinese guy is there telling her he sold her out. And then he just drives off. What is going on here? You've got 3 or 4 nonsensical things going on that don't make any sense, and the hyena's magically gone, and Harley Quinn doesn't have a scratch on her, and the movie just moves along to the next scene like all this is normal, and I'm just like, what happened here? This is the first reviewer to actually touch upon this. It's the most ridiculous thing in this whole film, and I was going to get to it, but it's further down on my page, but now we're there. I'm just like, I don't know if this is, you could say a movie would have something like this in it because of like multiple reshoots or multiple directors, or in the case of like a movie like a Star Wars movie, in the case of the Solo Star Wars movie, where the movie was mostly complete and then somebody higher up in the food chain just yanked the director out and a new director came in and filmed 80% of it all over again. That would explain how something like this happened, but that's not what happened with this movie. Same director, Kathy Yan, same Margot Robbie as, I believe, executive producer. She put her own money into this. Same production team. And what is going on here? Did they suddenly all lose their minds, have a drug-fueled binge in the middle of producing this movie? And what happened, And so, yeah, somebody finally mentions this. It makes no damn sense. It's the worst thing in the entire film. And should I mention, by the way, before I forget, that you're driving around the streets of Gotham, presumably in modern Gotham, because we do get glimpses of modern Android phones, very small glimpses, but they're obviously like possibly Samsung model phones from current time. mixed in with old ass Blackberries and etc. and payphones. Now they're driving around the streets of Gotham, and we encounter police cars. And kind of like how the police in the police precinct had old revolvers, like police from the early 80s or 70s would in old New York, the police are driving around in squad cars that are clearly from the early 90s. What? Next to modern day cars? It's again stuff that doesn't make sense, and it just sticks out and rubs you wrong, and you're thinking, where are we? What time period is this? Is this supposed to be stylistic? Why is all this stuff just rammed together in a nonsensical fashion like this? I don't know. I'm just like, I would shake my head more, but I don't want to wear my neck out at this point. 1 star. If I was to detail all the things wrong with this movie, we would be here all day. Harley is a terrible main character, and the best parts of her in Suicide Squad are non-existent in this film. I see they wanted to empower women, which is fine, but by dumbing down all the men does the women a disservice. Damn, DC, you almost had a franchise, almost. Um, I don't think the men were dumbed down. The men just weren't a thing in this film. All the men are just like bit characters. Even the character of Black Mask, who's a man, he's male, but even he feels like not the big bad, but a side character. And he's dispatched like a minor side character villain that's not really important, and it's very unsatisfying. And again, he's male, but it's definitely a portrayal of him as somehow sexually ambiguous. And so there's that too. But all the men, including the police chief, and if he's the chief, the police chief-like character, the Black Mask villain, they feel like side bit characters that aren't important to the story, and they're very just like there to be there. So I can't say they're dumbed down, because even the members of the Suicide Squad are just like cardboard cutout characters too, despite not being bit characters. So I don't think they were actually dumbed down. I just think that nobody in this film was characterized at all. It's a whole lot of just people playing their roles and rehearsing their lines, and they're doing good jobs of, performing their lines, but it just doesn't mean anything or feel real, and it's just actors going through the motions. It's all disjointed, disconnected emotionally, if you will. 2 stars. This movie should be called Margot Robbie Does a Cheesy Brooklyn Accent. What a load of crap. I bet that another Harley Quinn movie is not in anyone's future. Well, I'll say about the Margot Robbie accent, it's the same accent she had from the character as in Suicide Squad. It's a real accent. People do speak like this. It's not as common today as it was. And it's another thing that would fit with a 1970s, early 80s New York. It would fit a lot better. It doesn't fit in so much with a modern feeling New York or Gotham. And you can't really say Gotham, because I don't think they name this as Gotham in the movie. Like, it could just be New York. However, as ambiguous as the setting is, her accent's still believable for a Brooklyn accent, because there are people that still speak like this, older people typically, and it's cheesy and annoying at the beginning, but after about 5 minutes I got used to it. It's not necessary. I mean, you could easily have a good Harley Quinn character that doesn't have this annoying accent, but I don't know. Was she this way in the comics? I mean, the comics aren't an auditory thing. Comic books, you're reading the dialogue in a bubble. So did they say in the dialogue bubbles, or maybe the square ones where it's kind of a narration, that she has this cheesy Brooklyn accent? I don't know. I didn't read the comics. I don't know if that's a thing. But they already established it in Suicide Squad, so you can't just get rid of it in this film. If she had gone into this film without the accent, that would be flaw number 1 on the top of my list, because she had this accent in Suicide Squad. So I don't agree with that. But it is kind of off-putting along with the setting. Because in modern New York, even in Brooklyn, is this a big thing, this accent, to such a strong degree? It really isn't, because even if you go into not just New York, but look at the Deep South, go to Atlanta, Georgia, go there and actually hang out there and find out how people speak. They don't speak like characters that would be in Atlanta, Georgia, like 50 or 60 years ago. They do not, because Americans move around a lot. We all watch the same national programs. We all watch the same movies. We grow up as little kids exposed to the same things. When I was 5 years old, I was watching the original Star Trek series on TV in Northern California. The same person in Brooklyn would have been watching it at the same age. So it's not really believable that people would have accents like they used to. Some of them still do, yes, but in metropolitan areas like again in Atlanta, Georgia, you don't find everybody speaking with a southern accent. In fact, you'll find more people speaking with my accent or close to my accent than you will a southern accent. That's just the way it is. Now, I'm not saying out in the countryside people don't speak with accents. They do, but not all of them. Some of them speak just like me, and they've lived in rural areas in the South their whole life. So the idea that everyone in Brooklyn speaks like this, it's not really authentic to the modern day. But if you go back to movies from the 1960s and 70s set in Brooklyn, a lot of the characters have these accents. So I don't know if that's believable too, because I wasn't back there in that day. But it's just off-putting. I'll agree with the reviewer. It is off-putting in something that takes place in a modern setting in New York or in this Gotham. It is a little bit off-putting, this accent, from somebody her age, particularly. 2.5 stars. Birds of Prey had potential but fall short. It seems like it's rated R just to drop F-bombs, so they shrank their audience just to appear edgier. Yeah, I'll agree with that. That was a mistake. Not only just to drop F-bombs, but to have kind of gory stuff in it too that didn't have to be there, the little disgusting stuff going on. Some of it in the violence and some of it in the toilet humor. And it wasn't necessary. It could have been PG-13. All the Marvel movies are no more than PG-13. They're very effective. It needed to drop F-bombs. Yeah, there is that old, it's a well-known fact. If you end up getting an R rating, you shrink your audience. There's no question about that. A lot of films go out of their way to not get an R rating, or they'll even have two releases. They'll have a PG-13 for the theater. Then they'll come out with an R-rated version and call it something else, director's cut, unrated, whatever. Put that out on Blu-ray. Makes perfect sense. Yeah, I think that's a mistake here. But it's a double mistake, because all this edgy humor, it wasn't funny. It wasn't funny. You could see where they were trying to make it edgy humor, but I was just watching it wanting to yawn, going, wow, what a wasted opportunity. But let's continue. Most of the major cast is wasted and given very little to do, and fight choreography is terrible. Yes, I've mentioned that a few times. Most of the best stuff in the movie is Robbie as Harley, but it's just not enough to elevate the film. Yeah, she doesn't do anything unique. We don't even learn anything new about her. You don't know more about her character, Harley Quinn, in this film by the time you finished it than you knew at the end of Suicide Squad. If you're looking to learn something new about Harley Quinn, you're not going to get anything. It's not an origin story. There's no attempt at one. You don't get an origin story on anything in this film. In fact, you're probably more confused about what's going on than you were in Suicide Squad. That's because they screwed this up so bad. So, yeah. 0.5 star, incoherent plot, and just an absurd storyline. Nothing to do with Suicide Squad. Yeah, other than Harley Quinn's in Suicide Squad, there's nothing to do with this. The Joker is just like something to mention all over the place, particularly at the beginning of the film, to try to associate it with Suicide Squad or with the larger DC universe, but it's a complete fail. 5-star reviews. Really? I'm sorry. I'm not going to read those. No way in hell. 0.5 star. This is one of the worst movies I've seen in my short 30 years of living. Oh my God, what was this crap? I truly forced myself to watch this movie because I'm a movie DC film guy. This was truly a waste of 140 minutes of my life. 140 minutes? Let's take a look at the actual runtime. Got a running time of, wow, it's not going to tell me. Why doesn't it want to tell me? Usually it will tell you, no, it doesn't actually, it may somewhere, but it doesn't actually tell me the running time here. I can say honestly that it felt short. It did really feel short. I would in no way want this movie to be longer with the way it is. It'd be worse. Um, it felt like it wasn't too long. It felt like it was short, particularly in the way Black Mask was just blown up at the end. You know, it almost teases you that there's going to be some kind of epic fight at the end. It was the only thing that made me, that convinced me not to shut this off. But when Harley Quinn goes to the pier, the foggy, very, again, visually, deliberately foggy and stylistic pier on the waterfront, to have this final confrontation with the big villain, Black Mask, it promises you to give you something, but instead it lets you down. He's just blown up with a hand grenade, and that's it. Wow. Big letdown. And it makes the movie feel very short, like there was supposed to be some big epic fight thing going on there, and there wasn't. It just like stopped. The main big bad just was blown up, and it just brought everything to a screeching halt. And it felt very short, I'll give it that. But in the wrong ways, it felt short. Half a star, August 10th. This movie was objectively terrible and extremely boring. Was barely able to finish it and wondered what the fuck I had just seen once it was over. Too bad though, I like what's her name as Harley Quinn. Yeah, again, I'll agree. I like Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. I just think this movie was crap. Boring. 2.5 stars. It fixed Suicide Squad's issue, but it's pretty cringeworthy. It fixed Suicide Squad's issue. First of all, Suicide Squad had more than one issue. Wow. Anyway, even if you think it did fix something in Suicide Squad, it made everything else worse. In particular for the DC Cinematic Universe, it just made it worse. Brought it down a notch or two or three. Wow. Half a star, August 5th. This was just painful. I muscled through it just to say I saw the whole thing. Yeah. So disappointed. DC should just stop while they're way behind. Yeah, it's very strange. DC, I don't know why they can't create a cohesive cinematic universe. It's like they're rushing everything. They're just in such a hurry to make it all come together. Marvel took a decade. They want to do it all in 1/3 the time and make it as convincing, and it's just not. It's just not. And they seem to pick the wrong directors. It's like they picked the wrong directors that just either don't know how to work with each other, don't want to get on the same page, don't want to, there's no overall, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they say it's because of Kevin Feige that he glued it all together. Probably. But it's like DC just doesn't have somebody like that. There's nobody with the authority to pick the right directors, to keep them all in line, to make sure none of the stories go too far off course, to make sure everything feels like it fits together, even if it's different, thematically different between different movies in some ways. DC just feels disjointed and rushed, and it's like a whole lot of money's invested, and it's just money that's pretty much, from what I can tell, overall, the DC movies just haven't made money. They've been a financial loss. Not a complete fail overall, although some of the films individually are. But overall, just a financial drag. Not a plus, not a positive column in the ledger, so to speak. Yeah, 1.5 stars, boring story, lack of interesting characters, and a vanilla portrayal of a complex character. Yeah, all that you got about why Harley Quinn is the way she is that she fell into a vat of chemicals at the chemical factory, similar to how, even more blandly and less detailed in a way, she fell into a vat of chemicals, as like the Joker did at the beginning of 1989's Batman. And 1989's Batman, like I said, it could get away with that because it's Tim Burton and his weird, wacky style. You could overlook that problem. But not here. It's just they tried to do the same thing. She fell into a vat of chemicals. All of a sudden, she's Harley Quinn and she's in love with the Joker. And before that, she was some kind of psychologist or psychiatrist or she was employed at the Gotham's Arkham Asylum. And she just tells you that in her narration, and you don't know any more than that. And that's not what you needed to flesh her character out. The rest is just her wisecracking. Pointless. 1.5 story. Or 1.5 stars. There isn't 1.5 stories here, trust me. 3, 4 stars. Let's do one more page. I don't get 4-star reviews. 2 stars. The villains and R rating are the only good things about the movie. No, the villains are pointless in the R rating. The stuff that happens because of the stuff that happens that gives this an R rating is pointless and unnecessary, and it's just a little bit too over the top for a comic book movie. Doesn't work. Um, Half a star. Very disappointing. I'm more of a Marvel fan, but I still love DC. This movie gets everything wrong. Black Mask is a joke, the Birds of Prey are a joke, and the hyena is on the cover of every poster for the movie, but only appears for about 2 minutes, and it's actually meant to be 2 hyenas. Harley has the writers clearly know nothing about these characters. Overall, the movie is a failure. I would rather watch Suicide Squad and Justice League every week than watch Birds of Prey. It's an insult to the characters. I agree. And yes, I mentioned this before. Harley Quinn acquires a hyena from one shady character running some kind of illegal exotic pet store somewhere. Not believable, but let's go with it because it's a comic book movie. She acquires this full-grown hyena, somehow very well behaved hyena. Somehow. It's CGI. Yeah, it gets blown up in her apartment, and then at the end of the film, she's got the same height. It's the same CGI hyena, exactly the same, no question about it. Back with her in her Jaguar convertible, and she very briefly kind of hints in her dialogue that she got a new hyena, but not exactly. It's a little bit confusing and almost makes you think that it's the same hyena, and suddenly the hyena just wasn't dead. She had found it somewhere in the debris. Like, it's very weird the way she kind of explains this in her dialogue, and so you're left with the impression at first that it's the same hyena somehow. But no, she acquired a second hyena that just happens to be exactly identical to the first because they're too lazy to even change the CGI on the hyenas. Why? Why the hyena? Uh, Hyenas are, it's stereotypical that a hyena has this laughing sound it makes. Actually, they don't make that sound very often. I've lived in Africa, been around hyenas. They actually don't make sounds at all most of the time. They just kind of like grunt and snarl when they do make sounds. So, on a lot of levels, even in a stereotypical sense, it doesn't make sense because in this film, as they say, the hyena doesn't really do anything. It only appears for about 2 minutes, if that, and it doesn't even give it off a stereotypical laugh like they do in some films. But trust me, hyenas don't even make that sound for the most part. They're just like overgrown wild dogs, and the whole thing is just kind of pointless. 1 star. Not sure what everyone else saw. The plot was just absent, and the director was shocking. If this were a kid's cartoon made on a cheap budget, you would forgive it, but nearly 60 million went into this steaming turd. Question mark. I have a question mark too. It doesn't look like 60 million. I'm not sure. Maybe that went into Margot Robbie's salary and some other people's. Because yeah, it's like a B movie. It's like a B movie. Um, Honestly, I loved Margot Robbie in her previous Harley Quinn roles, and Ewan Mcgregor is a good actor, but neither could make this film good. If this doesn't kill any plans DC has for the future of Birds of Prey and Harley Quinn, nothing will. I should say I love some films critics hate because sometimes, yeah, well, 1 star, I can agree with you on that. I give it 1.5, okay, because you could see the director put effort into the visual style, but absolutely no thought into believability, no thought into characterization, no thought into backstory, no thought into something believable that could drive the plot forward, no thought into a satisfying ending. So, yeah, I'm going to leave this one, and I'm going to say that I'm going to conclude that these scores are largely political. They have nothing to do with what really people really think about this film. In particular, the audience score. It has very little to do with the audience scores that I read. Um, I think it's largely this is seen by some as some kind of political statement, although it wasn't marketed really that way. but it's seen that way somehow, and that's enough to keep this at a 78%. Mind you, it started in the 90s, when this was in the theater. Now it's dropped to 78. Are there other things on my list? Well, let's see. Anything I didn't mention? Payphones. Yeah, the Funhouse fight, it's obviously designed for style, but it's very fake and boring. No, I think I covered everything. Um, no realism. Everything adds up to it. There's just nothing real enough to get into, despite the boringness. It's just watching a whole lot of visual stuff going on and wondering why and how somebody thought that investing 60 million. I'll wager that Margot Robbie, having put her personal money into this, took a loss. That's my wager on this, despite I don't know what she says about this. I haven't seen any interviews on. I've seen interviews of her talking about this before it came out. I haven't seen any about her reminiscing on how she thought it turned out. But I would wager that financially it wasn't so great for her. And I'm going to say the 78% audience score, I would find that more believable at about a 48% on the audience score from what I read. And the 78% on the tomato meter to suggest, out of 407 critics, that 78% of them thought this was fresh. Very shocking unless it's political and they just care about the political messaging. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I will see you again on another episode of Rotten Reviews.